In the quiet coastal town of Morro Bay, the lighthouse stood like a forgotten sentinel against the endless gray of the sea. Every evening at dusk, Elias climbed the narrow spiral stairs with a lantern in one hand and a thermos of black coffee in the other. He had tended the light for 11 years, ever since the storm that took the previous keeper and left the harbor without its guiding pulse. Mira arrived on a rain-lashed Tuesday in late autumn, carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel and a sketchbook filled with unfinished coastlines. She rented the small cottage at the edge of the cliffs, the one with the broken weather vane and the windows that never quite shut against the wind. The townsfolk said she was a painter. Elias only knew that her footsteps sometimes crossed the path to the lighthouse when the fog rolled in thick enough to swallow sound. They never spoke of why she came. He simply noticed that on the nights the beam swept across the rocks, her silhouette would appear at the cottage window, still and watching. Sometimes she left a thermos of stronger coffee at the base of the tower. Sometimes he left a folded oilskin coat draped over her porch railing when the weather turned mean. One December evening, the sea rose higher than it had in years. Waves clawed at the foundations of the lighthouse. Elias stayed at the lamp all night, adjusting the mechanism by hand when the automatic gears began to seize. Near dawn, when the wind finally dropped, he found Mira already on the gallery, hair plastered to her face, hands raw from climbing the outer ladder in the dark. She did not explain how she knew the mechanism had failed. She only took the oil can from his grip and worked beside him in silence until the light turned true again. After that, she began appearing more often, not every night. Just enough that the absence of her footsteps on the path felt louder than their presence. She sketched the beam cutting through fog. He repaired the cottage shutters without being asked. When a storm tore the roof from the old boathouse, they worked side by side for 3 days, sharing tools and the same quiet rhythm of labor. At the end of the third day, when the last nail was driven, she stood close enough that he could smell salt and turpentine on her skin. Neither of them moved away. Winter deepened. The town grew quieter. On the longest night of the year, the lighthouse lamp failed completely. Elias worked until his hands bled. Mira arrived without a word, carrying spare parts she must have scavenged from the abandoned marine yard. Together they restored the light just as the first fishing boats began to search for the harbor mouth. When the beam finally cut the dark, she rested her forehead briefly against the cold glass of the lantern room. He stood behind her, close enough to feel the warmth of her body through 2 layers of wool, and neither of them spoke. Spring came late. One evening, Mira did not appear at the cottage window. Elias walked the cliff path at dawn and found her sketchbook left open on the porch table, the last page showing the lighthouse from a distance that suggested departure. The cottage was empty. The weather vane still pointed nowhere. He returned to the tower. That night the light turned as it always had. Yet when the beam swept the empty cottage, something in the rhythm of the mechanism felt slightly off, as if a gear had been adjusted by a hand that was no longer there. Years later, travelers still speak of the keeper who never left Morro Bay and of the faint scent of turpentine that sometimes drifts through the lantern room on certain winds. They say if you stand on the gallery at dusk and look toward the cliffs, you might see a figure at the cottage window, though the cottage has stood empty for a long time. The light continues its slow, faithful circle. It does not waver. It simply keeps turning night after night, as if waiting for something that never needs to be named.